am happy to present Renee, and she is from the Center for Heirs Property Preservation. We are happy to have you and your staff this morning, and of course, at this time, everything is good.
Thank you. Thank you to Mrs. Colson for agreeing to host us this morning. Thank you for all of you for coming out. I'll start out by introducing those who are here from the center. We have our Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Jenny Stevens, here, and our Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Josh Walden, and Brianna Bogan, Staff Attorney, David Bourgeois, Forrester. And also today, in addition to the staff from the Center for Heirs Property Preservation, we have members of the North Carolina State University staff. We have Yelena Lukamanowicz. Aaron Hill, Lindsay Smart, and Sam Cook. And we also have some staff from the Low Country Land Trust. I don't see Mr. David Ray, he's around, and Bruce Benny. So in addition to our seminar, our traditional Heirs Property seminar, we have some other opportunities for you today. So after the seminar, we're gonna have a couple options of things you can do. If you have personal and family land issues, probate issues that you'd like to discuss with myself, Mr. Walden, or Ms. Brianna, you have individual consultations that you can sit with an attorney for private consultation about your particular family issues. Also, the ladies from North Carolina State University would like to have an opportunity to get your opinion about what's going on here on Johns Island. Here you see this map, and you'll have an opportunity to tell them what on Johns Island is important to you and what you'd like to preserve. So they'll give you an opportunity to give your input about what's happening here on your island. Okay, so I'll start out by telling you a little bit about the Center for Heirs Property Preservation. We've been around starting in 2002 as a special project with the Coastal Community Foundation, and it was found that there was a need for services for heirs property landowners, and in 2005 we became an independent nonprofit agency. We do what we call 3 buckets of work. They include prevention, like today's seminar, teaching and educating the community about land ownership. The second bucket is resolution, where we help families who have heirs property issues in clearing their titles, preventing the spread of heirs property. And then finally, we have our land utilization, which Mr. David Bourgeois is going to talk to you about, our forestry program. So those are the basic things that we do at the center. So some housekeeping. You have a packet of materials in front of you. The materials that I'm going to be using and speaking to you are this packet that has the pie on the front and this booklet. And contains our legal information. I'm not going to be reading those to you. You'll have it to take home with you to read, share with your friends and family. I will make references to pages here and there, but I'll basically be guided more by your questions. And I'm going to pause and go back for a little bit. I want to recognize Councilman Anna Johnson, who's here with us today too.
Good morning, good morning. Good morning.
Other very important thing in your package, you have a green sheet. It's an evaluation sheet. And so my bosses are here today, and they'll get to see me do this, and they have to know that I'm here.
You notice I have my pen out, I'm taking notes, great notes.
But I'd like to know how I present it to you. Did I convey the information clearly to you? So if you take some time to give us an evaluation, there are questions about my presentation as well as David's. So please take the time to complete that before you leave and turn it in to us. And feel free to write comments at the bottom or on the back. If you want to take notes for yourself, there's a note placed on the back of this packet. Don't write your notes for yourself on the green sheet because I like to have those. So, and again, I like interaction and questions, so feel free to jump in, please participate. I don't like doing all of the talking. So we're gonna start out. So this is an heirs property seminar. So let's start out by discussing what is heirs property. Does anybody have any ideas? Anybody think you have heirs property in your family?
Yes.
So why do you think it's heirs property?
Because, I'm sorry. Because it's property that's been passed down from previous generations, and it's entitled to all of the heirs, whoever they may be, siblings, sisters, brothers, a whole world of individuals.
Okay. Anybody else have, Ms.
And there is no ownership. Heirs property don't have ownership. You know, there's not a individual person who is totally responsible, I would say.
Okay, well, there are owners. All of the heirs collectively own the property. Good morning, come on in, did you sign in, please? So, before I clear up about exactly what heirs property is, who is an heir? Does anybody have any idea of what an heir is?
An individual who owns a percentage.
Okay, and how do you get that ownership?
Blood relation.
Okay. All right, so when you own land, usually it started out with somebody getting a deed to the property to identify their ownership in the land. And when you are the owner, if you own a house that you live in now, you bought, you have a deed that gave you ownership rights. If you die, that ownership has to pass to other people. So if you die and you do not have a will, the people who you leave behind, starting with your spouse and your children, are your first line of heirs. And as generations go on and people die, those heirs can become grandchildren, nieces, nephews, extended family. So technically, the definition of heirs property is property that is still in the name of someone who is now deceased, and it is now owned collectively by that group of heirs. There's a joint ownership, so the property is owned, it's just owned as tenants in common by all of the heirs of the property, and we will talk about who the heirs are. So, I mentioned you own property, you have the right to do what you choose with your property during your life. You can give it away, sell it, do whatever you want to. But any transaction regarding land has to be in writing, so there needs to be a deed, a written document. And the requirements for a deed are that it be in writing, it be signed by the owner of the property, it be witnessed by uninterested parties, and notarized. And a deed should be recorded in the deeds office, wherever that might be. It's called different things in different counties, but wherever your deed records are held in your county, that deed needs to be recorded there to give the general public notice about transfer of ownership. So that's what you can do while you're alive. Once you die, you no longer have a signature, so you can't get that document that you need to transfer that ownership. So there has to be some other process to document the transfer of the property. So one of several processes will happen. There's going to be a probate, And in South Carolina, you have a 10-year period to probate an estate. If you miss the 10-year period, that's technically when the property becomes heirs property. It then is owned by the heirs of that now deceased landowner. And then there needs to be some other process to document the transfer of that ownership. Because ownership actually transferred when the person died that owned it. But there's no record, public record, to show who is the owner of the property. So there has to be a process, some legal action to transfer the property on the record from the person who previously owned it and is now dead to the names of the surviving heirs. So, has anyone ever participated in the probate process? Had to do a probate for a loved one. Okay, so we have a couple people who've done probate. Probate can be relatively easy. It's form-driven. The fees are based on the value of the property in the estate. And so it's relatively inexpensive. It's $95 for the first $100,000 of assets, and then 0.0015% of their value above $100,000. So relatively inexpensive as far as the fees to the court are concerned. So when you die, you are either testate or intestate. That means either testate, you have a will, that document that we refer to as your last will and testament, or you are intestate, meaning you did not have a will. So one of the things I emphasize all the time, and my song is get a will, get a will, get a will. Okay? I encourage everyone to get a will. One of the services that we provide at the center is that we do provide free wills clinics in the communities throughout the year to give everyone an opportunity to get a will. Also, we provide preparation of wills in our office for a minimal fee. But anyway, you can say who gets your property by having a will. If you do not create a will, then the state determines who gets your property. Come on in. So, if you write a will, you get to say who your property will pass to. No one is entitled to receive anything from you. You can leave your property to whomever you choose, with some minor few exceptions. If you exclude a spouse, your spouse can exercise an elective share right to have 1/3 of the value of your estate. And you're required to provide for minor children. Outside of that, you can leave your property to anyone you choose. So you get to say, by writing a will, who gets your property. The requirements for that will are pretty much the same as they are for a deed. It has to be in writing. It has to have 2 uninterested witnesses, signed by the testator, the person creating the will, notarized. Unlike the deed, your will does not get recorded until after you die, because you have the right to change your will as often as you choose up until the time you either lose your mental capacity or die. So you can change it. So you just hold on to it, make sure that your family members know how to find it and that they are to probate it after your death. So what does a will do? Besides, I mentioned saying who gets your property. The other very important reason to have a will is you get to nominate who gets to be the personal representative. So a couple hands to people who said they did probate. What does somebody being the personal representative, often referred to as an executor, mean to you?
I have to make all executive decisions, follow through with the will, do the final, make sure the deed and everything is fine.
Okay. Correct. So, being the personal representative or executor is a job. Okay?
Yes.
It is a job with responsibilities and obligations that you can be sued if you do not comply with the duties of the personal representative. And so, people often argue about who's gonna get to be the personal representative. It doesn't mean that you get anything, it's not necessarily the person that's gonna inherit the property. So you're arguing, fighting about getting a mostly unpaid job most of the time. So, that's how I explain it to people, because whether you're getting something is not determined by whether or not you're the personal representative. The personal representative is independent. It could be the same people that are inheriting, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So, understand that that's an important reason to have a will. I often hear people, especially younger people, say, well, I don't own anything. Well, hopefully, between the time you create your will and you die, that you will own something. And you want to prevent things from happening, because often what happens is a parent dies and some younger person inherits something. And unfortunately, sometimes there's not enough time in between those events and their death for them to get a will. And so now, a parent might have done all the right things and prepared a will, and it was probated and the property was transferred, and now it ends up being owned by this person who doesn't have a will, who dies suddenly, and now all that work of that parent is basically wasted, because now we're back in an heirs property situation that could have been prevented by simply having a will. Okay? So it's very important to have a will. And why I said getting the opportunity to nominate somebody to be personal representative is important, because in a situation where there is no will, the court looks at the priority list provided in the statute to say who gets priority to be the personal representative. And if there are a large group of people, usually siblings, who have equal priority, no one of them can be appointed by the court without a formal process, which can be more costly, without getting the consent by a form called a renunciation of the right to administer from all of the other siblings. Often, sometimes there is one sibling who's MIA, and that holds up the process because you cannot get that renunciation from them. So, another very important reason to have a will, besides saying who gets the property, is to nominate who gets to be the personal representative. So
Renee,
even if there are,
excuse me, what do you mean by renunciation?
you give up your right, you waive your right to be the person who's appointed. And so you say that I'm okay with Susie, my sister, being the personal representative.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? That sometimes holds up the probate process for people, because the court will not allow them, they want to do the right thing and probate their parents' estate, but they've got that missing sibling or that now deceased sibling who's left children that they can't find or identify, that holds up the process. These are all things that deter people from going through the process of probating their loved one's estate and end up leading to heirs property. Okay? So, let's talk about who inherits if there is no will. So I said if you don't have a will, you're intestate, and the state has statutes that determine who gets your property. And so the first line of heirs is your surviving spouse and your children. So if you have a spouse and children, your spouse gets 1/2. Your children, regardless of the number, will split the remaining 1/2. So if you've got a situation where you have multiple children, one of them died before you, their share goes to their children. So often I hear people say, well, I'm the last child, so isn't the property mine? No, it's not. I call that the last man standing rule. It does not apply.
Or the first man.
Yeah, does not apply. So if you had siblings and they died, they left children, then those siblings, their shares go to their children. And so usually, rather than making your situation better, it's really gotten worse because you got more people to deal with. Every time somebody dies, usually the number of people involved, the number of heirs explodes. So the difference between a descendant and an heir is very important. So if it was my grandfather's land and my parent, the child of that landowner, is still alive, I am not an heir. I am a descendant, but I am not an heir. And so I'm not part owner of that property. Only when my parent, whom I would inherit through, has died, do I become an heir. So often people come in and they say, well, this was my grandfather's land and I want my share. And I say, well, which of your parents was the descendant of that landowner? And they say, my mother. I said, when did she die? Oh, she's still alive. You're not an heir, okay? So you have to have been in the flow through, and it has to go through your parent. And if your parent is still alive, they still own their interest and you're not an heir. So who is a child? Who is not a child? Children, only biological and legally adopted persons are children for purposes of inheritance. Foster children, stepchildren, raised children do not inherit without a will. Like I said before, if you have a will, you can include anybody you choose, but without a will, they do not inherit. So, what happens when you name people who are not children on your obituary? You give me a headache.
Very good.
You give me a headache. That's what happens. So, in our job at the center, and anytime you're gonna have to do probate, petition to determine heirs, quiet title action, you're probably gonna read a lot of obituaries. So one of the things we ask our clients to bring in are obituaries for the people who've died. And we get all these nice obituaries, and they listed 12 people. And when we first had the initial interview and I asked, how many children did the landowner have? And he told me 7. And I said, well, where are these other 5? Well, cousin Susie, she grew up with us. And Mary, she was the neighbor next door. She was always at our house, and Mama thought of her as a child. Don't do that. So I've established a new rule. And here's my advice about writing your obituaries. I know it's an emotional time when your family members die, and you want to be everybody's lovey-dovey, and you want to include everybody. So my new litmus test is, if there's $1 million on the table, and it's going to be divided by the children, are you willing to share it with them? Okay. If you're willing to share it with them, go ahead and put them on there. If you're not, then I suggest you not include them as a child. You can put people on the obituary without naming them as children, siblings, special friends, love, dearest, nearest, niece, whatever. Use all the adjectives you can come up with, but do not include them with labels other than what they actually are. Because even though an obituary is not a legal document, it is used as evidence in determining family trees. Okay? So, please, please, please stop listing everybody under the sun as children and sisters. Okay? So, who's the spouse?
Renee.
Yes.
I have a question. So with obituary, pretty much keep it simple, just keep it simple.
Keep it accurate.
But with the wills, be specific.
Be specific. When you're doing a will, you're going to name people specifically by name unless you want to leave it to a group, such as all of my children or my grandchildren to share life, something like that. But even that can be tricky. If you have, unless you really want to share it with all the people, then name them specifically. Okay? So who's a spouse?
Someone you're married to legally,
How do you get married?
by a notary, a preacher, pastor.
Okay, so in South Carolina, you can end up with a spouse by one of two ways. You can either get a marriage certificate and do one of those ceremonies, walk down the aisle, or you could end up being married by common law. It still exists in South Carolina, even though I had one of my participants said he got rid of it, but anyway. He said he did away with common law marriage in South Carolina. But I haven't found that in the case law, so it still exists. So, you could end up being considered common law married to somebody. And people always want to know, well, how long we have to live together. There are no set in stone rules about it. The court looks at what they call the totality of the circumstances. Do you do all the things that married people do? Did you hold yourself out in the community? Are you having children, buying property together, doing things that married people do, filing tax returns? They look at all of those things. It either needs to be established during the lifetime or within 8 months after the person dies. But anyway, you could have a common law spouse. So, if you don't want to be married to a person any longer, you don't want them to inherit from you, then you need to get a divorce. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who have been separated for many, many years, but you're still married. And if you die, as I indicated before, you can put whoever you want in your will, but the spouse still has that option to assert their elective share to 1/3 of the assets of the estate. So if you don't want them to get anything, you're no longer planning to consider getting back together, get a divorce. I know we're at church and some people don't believe in divorce, but the legalities of it is you leave a mess if you don't get a divorce. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. So if people who are married under common law, there are no documents, so what do you do if you say that, you know, that
You still have to
person?
get a divorce.
Okay.
Because in actuality, like you said, either there's gonna be some assertion before a court to establish it. So if they assert it, then, or you think they might, then you need to do an action to say it's not. So in South Carolina, you cannot be married to more than one person. Bigamy is against the law. So, but here are some scenarios that happen. I stopped making up stories after I've been at the center for a while.
It's a big counter.
So, Mr. Joe and Mrs. Mary got married in 1975. Mr. Joe got tired of Miss Mary. He moved down the street, went to get cigarettes, and he never came back. He ended up down the street with Miss Sally. They've been together since 1980, and they have children. They got a house, all this stuff. Mr. Joe dies with no will. Miss Mary's still a wife. She's entitled to half, even though he had nothing when he left her.
See, why you gotta go there?
And Susie over here, she gets nothing. Her children, they will share in their half of whatever he had, but she gets nothing. Okay? So, reasons to have a will, reasons to get they've been together since 1980. She cannot assert common law marriage because he was still married. He had a valid marriage, and so he could not have a second marriage on top of it. Okay? So,
Amen. That's a very good point, because that happens a lot in South Carolina.
yes,
So I think people really need to be aware of that.
and Miss Mary's still entitled to Social Security and whatever else comes with being a surviving spouse. And Susie is just out of luck. So, other reasons it's important to have wills is because stuff happens when people die. So, and people that we think should not have any interest in our family land end up having an interest. For example, landowner Joe had 5 children. He died, no will. Each child inherits a share. One of the children then dies, leaving a spouse. That spouse, no blood relationship to the land, now owns that 20% interest. No matter whether he or she goes off and remarries 1 time, 2 times, 5 times, it doesn't matter. They own that interest. People are not happy to hear that when I say they call her not so nice names. You need to talk to her because she owns 20% of this land. She needs to be involved in this. Well, she done went and got married and done all these other things. She owns 20%, you better be nice. So those are reasons why you need to have a will. Even if your name is not on the title, because it's heirs property, you can leave whatever interest you have in the property in a will. And so in a situation like that, where you have an interest in property that's heirs property, usually my recommendation is that you name your children to inherit that piece of property, or your siblings, so that it stays in that biological family. So that's one way to avoid an outsider, per se, from owning an interest in the property by designating in the will. The other reason you want to designate one person or so that that expansion of people is reduced. So if I have an interest in the property and I name a person in the will to get that share, then I don't have to worry about that fraction being divided even more. So, so now, what happens? Person died, there was no probate during the 10-year period. So now we're at this heirs property situation. And so now we have one of 2 options that we have to take to clear the title. The first option is also a probate action. It's called a determination of heirs action. It's to determine heirs. Then probate court, it's more expensive than just probate. And probate, I mentioned, just form-driven, fee based on the value of the property. With the determination of heirs action, you're gonna have to file a complaint. There's recording fees, you have to go before a judge. There are all these additional fees, newspaper publication, getting a guardian ad litem, more expensive than just doing the probate. And what you're asking the court is to look back to the date of death of that landowner and say, as of that time of death, who were the persons that inherited an interest in that property? Okay, so that's the first option. And that works usually when most of the heirs of the landowner are still alive. And so you're just asking the court to say that interest passed to these people. Often what we see though is property that has not been deeded for decades, and that last owner has been dead for many years, and since their death, a lot of the heirs have died as well. In that case, you have to do what's called a quiet title action. And a quiet title action takes place before the master in equity, or if the county does not have a master in equity, a person called a special referee. It's more expensive, more complicated, more time consuming. It involves all the things that you need to do for a determination of heirs action, but you also have to do the title search. Title search can be expensive. You get somebody who's called a title abstractor, who has experience going and look at the county deeds record to search all of the records to see if there are any transactions that affect this piece of property. When we were in probate court, all we were really looking at were who are the heirs. When we're in front of the master in equity, we're looking at all factors, all the outside factors, judgments, liens, anything that affect this piece of property. And when you get an order from the master in equity, you have an order that definitively says, as of the date of this order, these are the people who are the owners against all the rest of the world. It gives you clear title. Okay? So those are the differences, and there are stages. Probate's the first preferred option. If you miss that, the next option is determination of heirs. And if you're beyond that, because too many deaths, then you're looking at a quiet title action. And each of those is progressively more complicated, more expensive. So the moral of the story is, one, get a will. Get a will, get a will. When your loved ones die, probate their estates. We want to prevent the increase of heirs property.
Renee, I just want to learn something that we talk about a lot too much. I think people also should be aware that they can have a trust.
Yes,
So-
trust is an option.
Just for them to deal with that.
And trusts are technical, and we don't deal with those at the center, but that is an option. And a trust is an individual vehicle where you can title property into it. But if that's something you're interested in, then you should see a private attorney who specializes in that. Don't just go to any attorney and say, I want a trust. Just like you would not go to the podiatrist if your heart was, you thought your heart was beating irregularly, you wouldn't go to the podiatrist. Don't just go to your personal injury lawyer that got you a nice settlement when you had an accident if you want a trust done, okay? You go to somebody who specializes in creating trusts, okay? So there are other options, and in fact, one of the options is, I stated, when you're alive, you can do whatever you want to with your property. And one of my recommendations to people, if you're looking at estate planning, is stuff you're not using any longer, go ahead and transfer it. What are you keeping it for? Carrot to dangle in front of your children? Like, just go ahead and give it to them. There are things you can do with your deed that will cause the property to automatically transfer after death. So there are other options, but just in a general sense, get a will, and even if you have one of those other vehicles, such as a trust, you should still have a will in case there's something that you acquired after the fact, or you just forgot to name and put in the trust. So it's a backup anyway. So, what are the options of how you can get this property out of heirs property status? Besides doing these legal actions, determination of heirs, and quiet title actions, sometimes to facilitate that, we do what's called quitclaim deeds. Anybody ever heard of a quitclaim deed? You got a quitclaim deed? Why do you think that's what you have?
My mother gave me the property before she died, and we signed off.
Okay. So, was your mother the sole owner of the property?
She gave me the plot that she received from my dad dying.
Okay. So, generally speaking, in a broad sense, there are two types of deeds. There are warranty deeds and there are quitclaim deeds. A warranty deed, if you go down the street to the nearest neighborhood and you buy a house and you're paying them a few $100,000, you want to get a warranty deed, you want to get title insurance. Basically, you want them to guarantee that the ownership that they're transferring to you, they do in fact have it. It is in fact theirs. With a quitclaim deed, and that's Q-U-I-T, not quick, you often say quick claim. It is not quick, it is quit. Like, I quit my boyfriend, I quit school. You give up your interest, that's it. I give up, I'm abandoning any association with it. And so that's what you're doing. Whatever ownership interest I have in this land, I am giving to this other person. So you might use a quitclaim deed, and mom might have been the sole owner, but she said, whatever I own, I'm giving to my daughter. So I could give you a quitclaim deed to this piece of property. And what would you get?
Yeah.
Nothing. I have no ownership interest in it. So you essentially bought the Brooklyn Bridge, paid for it.
So is that what happens when people do go to tax sales and buy land?
No, that's different. You get a tax deed. So a tax deed is different, but you get from a tax deed what kind of, whatever authority or right the tax collector had in the property. That's not a warranty deed either.
Correct.
Okay? So it's, the title is still clouded and there still needs to be an action to clear the title if you get a tax deed as well. So, quitclaim deeds. So I describe the use for the quitclaim deed as what I call collecting marbles. So when this person dies and they own this property, at their death, this bag of marbles, this land that they own, shatters and it's scattered to the heirs. And so these marbles start moving around. And so now you got some ownership over here, some ownership over here, and ownership over here. If these people that have these marbles will deed their interest to one person, then they collect all the marbles. If you have 100% of the marbles, then you are the sole ownership. Now you're gonna have to take one of those actions that I talked about before, usually a quiet title action to present to the court, so that you get that order from the court that says, yes, we've looked at all of these documents, and based on you collecting all of these deeds, and this looks like the entire family tree, you are in fact 100% owner of the property. So that is a good use of a quitclaim deed. Now, here's the flip side of that. Be cautious of quitclaim deeds to outsiders. People often get letters from people, postcards in the mail. I see that your family owns this land, we'd like to buy it from you. And they offer to give you some amount of money in exchange for you giving them a quitclaim deed. Often, they're developers, and they see a piece of property that has good potential for them. They're not in it to be a part of your family. They have other motives. It is an investment, and they want to get a return on the investment. And so, and often, in my opinion, I think they look for what I call the weakest link. Now, I don't know about your families, but I know my family. There's some people who have some addictions, and they look for those people, $2,000, a few $100 maybe. If you sign this deed, I'll give you these couple $100. What does that do? That person who has bought that interest now takes that person's place on the family tree. So when you have heirs property, everybody has their fractional interest, and any person who has an interest in the property has the right to go before the court and ask that either the property be partition in kind or partition by sale. Partition in kind, usually family members, if there's adequate amount of land, they ask that there be a division of the physical property so that each person gets their share of the land. That's a partition in kind. A partition by sale, you are asking the court to sell the land so that the money is divided based on the ownership interest. Now, oftentimes, there are way more people than the land can actually physically be meaningfully divided. Because sometimes people have ownership interest in what I consider to be a handful of dirt. Because sometimes, depending on how long the family tree, how long it's been, and how many generations, I've had family trees where people's interests are the equivalent of 1/230 seconds. Okay? So, yep, your amount of dirt I could probably hold in my hand. So, while you cannot divide the land by that many fractions, money can be divided. And so, the best interest could be argued that, well, let's just sell the land and we divide the money. So this outsider who has gained an interest, his motive, her motive, it's the corporation's motive, is to get the land. They want a return on the investment, so they're arguing to the court to sell it. Well, most of our families are cash poor, land rich. So if you are not the person bringing the lawsuit, your option is to buy them out. But if you don't have the money to buy them out, by their value in the property, then they then have the option to buy you. And oftentimes that's how someone else owns the land. You have the right to get the money from the property sale, but you've lost the land. So 2017 Uniform Heirs Partition Act, commonly referred to Clementi-Pinckney Act in South Carolina. Everybody heard of that? Well, it did not prevent the sale of the land. It just put some limitations, some restrictions and guidelines for what has to happen before that sale can take place. So that's why you want to be cautious. Advise your family members not to do quit claim deeds to outsiders. Okay? So, these processes, besides the probate or sometimes petitions if the family's not too big, can be lengthy processes, can take years. What can you do in the meantime to protect your land, protect your ownership? Go on and work with your family. Make sure you're not overpaying in taxes. So make sure you're getting all the tax breaks that you're entitled to. If it's vacant land and it's more than 5 acres, you can probably qualify to have the property tax as agriculture. Tax much lower than vacant residential land. If you are living on the property and you can show ownership, you could be entitled to legal residence status, which gets you 4% tax versus 6% tax. And I do math, and 6% is 150% of 4%. But it doesn't look that way on the difference in the tax bill. So a 6% tax bill is generally gonna be 325% of the 4% tax bill. And for a long time, that really baffled me. But the difference is, when it's your legal residence, you get some tax credits. You get the sales tax credit and you get all these different credits. Versus when you're paying the 6%, you're non-resident, you're not getting those credits. So the 4% and the 6% are significantly different, more than the 150% difference. So make sure you're getting all the tax breaks you're entitled to. If it does qualify for your legal residence and you're over the age of 65 or you have a disability or blind, you could get a homestead exemption. So these are all things you have to apply for. You have to, they're not just gonna say, oh, I think she got 65 this year, we're gonna reduce her tax, not gonna happen. Okay? You have to apply for that. Surveys. Anybody have family land that's been surveyed?
And that's cutting them off and giving them to different,
So-
siblings or children.
And you just agree among yourselves, that I get this spot and you get that spot?
No,
I can't just draw it on a piece of paper and say this is yours.
You could. But it does not transfer legal title. Whether you draw it on a paper yourself or you go and spend thousands of dollars to have the property surveyed, that does not transfer the title. The only way to transfer interest in real estate is by a deed, which I described earlier, must be in writing, signed by the owner, witnessed by two uninterested people, notarized, and recorded in the deeds office. Unless you have one of those, your survey just was your nice vision that you wanted how the property to be divided. So you got a survey, and now the county sends you your individual tax bill, and it might say care of your name, but you are still not the owner of the property, it's still owned by previous owner, who's most likely deceased. So that is not ownership. Counties have been nice, and even without the surveys, people have been arguing about how we're gonna pay the property taxes, and they got tired of it, and so they asked the county, well, could you give me my tax bill separate from their tax bill? And they're nice, and they do that for you too, but it still is not your property, it's still in the name of the deceased landowner. So, the moral of the story is, don't spend money on a survey, because that's not gonna give you ownership. If that's your goal to get ownership, that's not the way. That might be part of the process, but that alone is not gonna get you ownership. All right?
Oh, and since you're talking about the tax bill too, just because a person is paying the tax bill doesn't mean that they.
No, ma'am. So, another story. I've been paying the taxes since 1940. Since I had my first job in the tobacco field when I was 14. Well, don't I have, isn't the property mine now? No, sir. So, when you have heirs property, you have the joint ownership, and anything that any person does, any heir does on the property, to the property, for the property, you do it for the benefit of everyone. So when you go pay the property taxes, you're paying for the benefit of everyone. Now, there are some arguments that maybe if there is a division or sale, that you might be entitled to some reimbursement of some of your taxes, but that's just an argument that you can be made that sometimes does prevail, but that does not give you a greater ownership interest. Okay? So, do not let your property get sold at tax sale. Do not. Do not rely on, I have a 1-year redemption period. That is being, strictly construed, the statute. The statute says that the taxpayer has the right to redeem within 1 year of tax sale. Some counties are interpreting that to mean the person on the deed. And if you have heirs property, that person is at the cemetery, and they cannot pay anything, and they cannot redeem anything.
But you took my money and that person was dead for a long time, didn't you, Ms.
Yes,
Miller?
you did. For the last 60 years, you've been taking my money, you've been letting me pay the taxes, and now, when I have a little hardship, and I missed the tax deadline, and you sold the property, now you're telling me I cannot now pay the money, even though I have it here in my hand in front of you, you're not going to accept it because it's been sold. So, do not allow your property to be sold at tax sale. Yes, ma'am.
If you have a piece of property that's been surveyed and subdivided for tax purposes, so So say you have 5 TMS numbers, and 5 different people are paying the taxes, and one of those people defaults on that tax bill. That can't trigger a tax sale, can it?
It can.
Just on, but technically this is Heirs property, so that one piece that's surveyed, that one TMS number that's tax delinquent, is really owned by the person who didn't pay the taxes.
That is correct. But since you knew that you were also an owner of that parcel, then you should have paid it. Otherwise, they sold it. And you can have some arguments about whether or not you were given notice, but they can sell it.
And then that person who then purchases that in the tax sale now becomes part of that family tree.
Yes. And so that person who had agreed to pay the tax on that parcel still owns their interest in the other parcel.
Wow.
They did not give up their ownership interest in the other parcel. So even though they were delinquent, whatever, in fault in not paying the taxes on the portion that they were using, their loss of that piece didn't give up their interest in the rest of it.
Yeah, just, which counties have started not allowing heirs property owners to redeem taxes?
Big D.
Yeah.
Dorchester County. So, and it appears that some others might try to follow in the same vein, so don't test that.
So have they actually done that, practiced that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
They actually, it's a lawsuit.
Newspaper article, Post and Courier back in December, it's no secret. Yeah.
Already.
And so the story, the situation in the newspaper was landowner property taxes, $200 some, got sold at a tax sale. Heir came up with the money within the 1-year redemption period, just a few $100s, and they refused to pay it. And person who bought it at the tax sale was real flippant and said, well, they knew what the rules were, or they should have known. I didn't do anything illegal. No, I'm not giving it back.
Let's say, there is property and maybe family members cannot, I guess, agree on how it should be divided. Will it be in the best interest to have the property appraised so that everybody can get equal value?
Well, yes, if you're dividing it, then yes. So every piece of property is not of the same value. So if you've got a tract of land, the frontage part on the road is more valuable than the piece in the back. Or if there's a piece on the beach, that's gonna be more valuable than the piece near nothing. So those are factors that you take into consideration when you're dividing the property. So if I get the piece in the back, maybe I'm entitled to a larger portion than the person who gets the piece on the front. But, and if you're looking at sale, then if you're gonna sell it, then it's gonna be sold and everybody's gonna divide the proceeds based on their percentage of ownership. Okay? More questions? All right, so if you don't have any more questions for me, then we're going to hear from Mr. David Bourgeois, forestry, and what you can do with your land.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Has everybody got it? So did we learn anything? Get a will, get a will, get a will? Where there's a will, there's a way. Don't wait, probate. These attorneys have all the exciting phrasing. I have to learn some of those for forestry. We don't have those in forestry. Does anybody want to stand up for a minute? We've been sitting for a long time. And while I want you to be very comfortable, I don't want you to be so comfortable you fall asleep while I'm speaking. But you can, that's okay, but I prefer not. So I'm David Bourgeois, forester with the center for the last couple of years, and prior to that, I was worked in forest industry here in South Carolina for over 35 years. I love the land, and we've talked about preservation, resolution, and now land use is my topic. And while I'm a forester and I love forestry and trees, land use can be a lot of things depending on what is going on in your land, what the history of your land is. And we got our start with the Sustainable Forestry Program. There's an endowment that back in 2013, they chose the Center for Heirs Property to do a pilot program of trying to use forestry to help people with their land, help them build generational wealth. And today we have Sam Cook, forester, who actually started that program here in South Carolina and has since moved on, and we've had several other foresters in the meantime. But the reason that they began this program and were interested in funding it is because there's a dramatic loss of land in the African American community. There was a study done, the figures we used it in around 1910, African Americans owned about 15 million acres of land. And by the early 2000s, that number had dwindled to 2 million acres. And that's just a dramatic loss of wealth, family wealth. Land, unlike many other things, is something that builds wealth over time. If you think back, I'll use myself as an example. The first car that I bought myself, owned and loved, might have cost me $7,500, and if at that time I had taken that $7,500, I might have been able to buy 10 or 15 acres of land. Well, today that wonderful car of mine has been worthless and went to the junkyard 20 years ago. If I were to sell 10 or 15 acres of land today, that would probably be worth, 20 or 30,000 or more, depending on if it was here on John's Auto, it might be worth far more than that. So land is an appreciating asset, not a depreciating asset. If you own land, if you're fortunate enough to own land, you're a very, very fortunate person, and you should treasure that land, try to keep that land in your family, because that's an asset that you can use to help you build wealth. Goal of our center is to try and educate you and to make you, I feel like a lot of times I'm a cheerleader to get people to be interested in their land and learn more about their land and learn the value of their land so that they will want to work with it, keep it in their family, and pass on that wealth to their children. We partner with a lot of different agencies, the South Carolina Forestry Commission, Clemson, Low Country Land Trust, Arbor Gen, Longleaf Alliance. There are a lot of groups here in the state that work with us to help our landowners. And a lot of, as I said, a lot of this is about education. And most people aren't really aware of forestry. In your packet, you have one of your many sheets in the packet, and you don't necessarily have to pull it out or anything, but forestry is a $21 billion industry in the state. That's money that comes to families. It involves oftentimes families of loggers that pass from their business on from one generation to the next, truck drivers moving wood, people working at wood processing facilities, people working at the Charleston pulp mill was Westvaco, then was Capstone now is Westbrook. There's a mill in Savannah, pulp mill, a mill in Georgetown. These companies hire lots of people. They bring wealth into our state. We have the ports here, and we export all kinds of wood and wood products and finished wood products that have been, made from basic wood into paper, into boards, into plywood, into wood pellets. Now, one of our big new markets is wood pellets that are being shipped off to Europe, where they're using those for energy. So we have lots of products, and anybody who's driven around here in the low country, you've seen there's log trucks on the road all the time going back and forth. And how does that affect you? Well, if you have forest land, that's a really great thing for you, because that means that there's competition among all these different businesses for a product that you have that you can grow on your own land. People don't necessarily know how much their land is worth or how much their forests are worth. The there was, historically, people came here to the South Carolina coastal plain, North Carolina coastal plain, Georgia, in the I'd say 30s, 40s, 50s. All the big forestry companies, all the big timber companies had kind of cut over a lot of the forest, first in the Northeast and then working their way the Lake States and then the Northwest, and all the virgin timber was pretty much gone, the easy pickings, the stuff where they could cut out and walk away. And they realized, if we're going to continue as a business and we have all these people wanting these products, we're going to have to grow new forests. And so all these companies came to South Carolina and bought up lots of land. You know, some have been in the mountains, but the vast majority of it, they wanted the place where they could grow trees really quickly and grow another crop of trees, another crop of trees. So they came and bought this land that just in from the coast. The land on the coast is not the absolute best, but as you get a little further in before you get into the major crop growing areas, if you ever look at a aerial photo of the low country, there's an area that has wetter soils, so you can't get in there and grow crops all the time because it's a little too wet. But it's fantastic for growing loblolly pine trees, longleaf pine trees, and these things that can grow really fast and can produce a crop. So they came in and bought all this stuff. So people who own property in those areas, you can do the same thing that these big companies are doing, and in fact, you can do that and actually get help from the government to grow trees on your land. A lot of times people, as I said, don't understand how the value of their land as far as for growing crops of trees. And so one way that I try to explain it is I say, if you have your land, timber cut in your land, and you just let it come back naturally, every acre in South Carolina will grow up to be something. And oftentimes, if there are pine trees nearby, they'll rain down seeds and there'll be so many trees. There might be 1,500 trees an acre growing really close together and crowded, and it'll be really skinny. It would take them a long time to be big enough for merchantability or to sell those trees. If there's only one or two here or there, or there's a lot of hardwoods or vines and things, they will take over an area, and you might have one tree over there, one tree over there, so you're not totally utilizing the land. Generally, there have been studies done that say that if you let your land down here grow naturally for 30 years, you can expect to get $500 to $1,000 an acre for the trees that are cut on that land. That's what somebody would pay you for it. So if you take your $1,000 an acre and divide that by 30 years, that's about $33 per acre per year that the land is worth, minus the taxes that you paid each year. So, it's certainly good, but it's not nearly as good as it could be. If you were to purposefully grow, plant trees, 620, 630 trees per acre, spread evenly across the land, and I'm sure if you've driven around the countryside here, you've seen some of these pine plantations where they have rows of trees. You can expect to harvest at about 15 years, come into a thinning and take out half of those trees approximately. And when you do that, you're taking out the smaller trees, anything that's forked, anything that's not quite straight, and those trees are going to be chipped up and made into pulp. Pulp is what goes to make paper and things like that, all the products we have all around us here. That's a $10 a ton product. You can sell pulpwood trees for about $10 a ton. Sawtimber trees, the things that you use to make boards and others, what we call solid wood products, like you find at Lowe's, Home Depot, those are a $25 a ton product. These are averages. So what you're doing when you do a thinning at age 15, you're thinning out, the trees are starting to get crowded together, you're thinning out about half of them, taking the lower value trees out. You can expect to get about $500 to $800 per acre when you do a thinning on a forest stand. So 15 years, divide that into $500, you get the same number you had before. $33 per acre per year, your land was worth to you that first 15 years. However, this is where it changes dramatically, because you've left your high value product, you're focusing all the growth, the sunlight, nutrients, water on those trees, and you have a higher value product. You only have to wait another 8-10 years. At age, say 23, you could come in and do a clear cut and expect to get about $2,500 to $3,000 for those sawtimber trees that you're selling. And what you've done is you've for the last 8 years of that rotation, if you divide 8, we'll use the lower number, divide 8 into 2,500, you get about $312 or $15 per acre per year that that land was worth to you, minus the taxes once again. So it's just a dramatic difference. You can grow probably 4 to 6 times as much merchantable timber on your property by growing a loblolly pine plantation or a longleaf pine plantation. Takes a little longer, as by just letting it grow up naturally, and most folks don't know that. And not only that, but you can, all these forest industry companies, they don't get any federal assistance for doing that. They have accountants that have told them, you know, if I spend $300 an acre to site prepare the land, shear up the old stumps, plant the best genetically improved seedlings that I can get, and maybe do a herbicide treatment, they're willing to spend money to do that, knowing that they're going to make a return on their investment of probably 5, 8, 12% a year. And investing in trees is different than investing in the stock market or bonds or things like that. It moves differently. You know, people are going to be building houses, people are going to be using paper. And as I said, we have lots of wood processing facilities here that are competing for our timber resources. So it's having land, once again, is a really great thing in my opinion. Let's see, manage, unmanage. When you go to, as I said, you can get assistance for this. If you have land that has been cut over, you know, the timber's been cut, if you come to us, what does that look like? Well, all we're going to ask of you initially is to fill out an interest form, and that'll just have the information about you, where your land is, you know, what your phone number is, what your email is. The center is trying to help as many people as they can. The people who fund the center want to know that we're actually helping people, and how many people are we helping, and how many acres are we affecting, and how much money does that mean for the people in our community. Can I get everybody to raise your hands for a minute? Okay, I was just testing something, that didn't work, because there's an old Chinese expression that says many hands make light work, and I thought maybe get that light to come back on, but it did not. Anyway, where was I? So, if you call the center, we will get an interest form on you, and we want to know, you know, who owns the land, is it Heirs property, it's not Heirs property. You know, I want to say I'm a forester for the Center for Heirs Property. A lot of people think, oh, you're you know, just helping people with Heirs property. Not true at all. Actually, if you have clear title to your property, I can help you far more. It's not that I can't help you, but I can help you far more if you have clear title to your property than if you have heirs property. A lot of people come to us and they say, well, I want to cut my timber, make some money, and if and when we find out they have heirs property, they're often disappointed because we will, at the center, we will not encourage you, we will discourage you from cutting timber until you get your title cleared. If you go to get heirs property cut, my wife actually works up at West Rock in Somerville, the sawmill. They call her up and they say, I want to sell my timber. The first thing she has to ask them, do you have clear title to your land? And when they say no, she says, I'm sorry, we can't buy your timber, because they can't get involved in that. And somebody, if you know, somebody pays you $30,000, you know, for your trees, and then the guy cuts the trees, and then 2 weeks later somebody calls back and says, I want my $30,000, you cut my trees, and you go, well, I paid them. Well, so big corporations cannot afford to get involved in lawsuits like that. They're not going to do it. There are people, and I could send you to someone who would cut your timber with their property, but they are only going to give you a fraction of what your timber value is. They will cut it, but they're taking on a huge risk that someone will come back and sue them, or they'll have, you know, fights with other people within the family. And another reason that we at the center would discourage you from doing that is we've had actual cases that there's a fellow that we were working with who had land in Hampton County, and also in Orangeburg County. He lives up in Orangeburg. He went down one day to visit his sister and sees that there's loggers that are out cutting the family land behind her house, and he made them cease and desist. And it turned out that his sister had decided she was going to just get the trees cut, and ended up that, you know, I guess she got the money, none of him or his brothers never got any, and So there's such animosity in the family now that they're not gonna work hard on trying to settle their heirs property issues. So we don't wanna cause more problems than are necessary. And when you try to do that, you're gonna cause problems if you try to cut heirs property. However, we can, if you have heirs property, we'll certainly come out, evaluate your land, tell you things that you can do on your land, assuming that people in the family are interested in doing that, to make it worth more. And a lot of times that's worthwhile, because if the folks who are invested in that and see the value in it, if they say, oh, those trees back there are worthless, I'm not gonna, why would I waste my time for a fraction of the value of that? Whereas if they say, hey, there is a lot of value here, then the family might wanna come together and try to work together to resolve their title issues. So come to the center, interest sheet, fill it out, and the next step would be I would generally make some maps, not unlike this map of John's Island here, but it would be more focused in on your land. And I would go and research some of the history of the land that I can tell, like on Google Earth. I can go back and look at what was this in the past. A lot of times the land that we go to might have been farmland. It was grown up and it's become, you got trees growing on it. We don't know exactly how long ago it was cut, things like that. But before I meet with the landowner, the next step would be to set up a meeting, but I want to know as much as I can about the land. What was the past history, and then I can also generate some soils maps that, you know, you might not even know, but there's very different soils underneath your ground, and some of them are much better for growing trees than others. Some of them, often I always make up drainage maps to show people, well, here's where the high ground is, here's where the low ground is. And so if you want to grow some crops on your land, you're not going to do it down there where it's really wet, and up here is going to be the best place to grow crops, it's the best place to grow trees. So then we'll arrange for a site visit, and we'll go out and walk the land with the landowner. And we would talk to you about, you know, what sort of things do you want to do with the land? As I said, oftentimes I'm focused on forestry because that's my background. However, we have plenty of landowners who have some fields, and they might grow a few, have a garden, or they might even lease them out to a farmer. If you have land that you're leasing to a farmer where you're getting steady annual income, even if it's not a lot, I'm not going to suggest that you plant trees there. You have an income stream. If you do forestry is a great autopilot thing where you can make money over a period of time. But once you plant your ground in trees, you're not going to be able to go back and do forestry without a lot of expense, because people think that, well, if I plant the trees and I'll get a crop of trees and I'll grow some crops. Well, no, because you would have to take the stumps out, and it would take several years. And we've had examples where people came to us, similar situation with here in John's Island. There's a lot of development going on. The company I used to work for, Westvaco, owned land between Somerville and the Edisto River. And we did this thing called the East Edisto Project. We were trying to find out, what do the landowners here want? And they came to consensus that we want traditional land use, forestry and farming. So the other fellow is actually works at the center, Steve Patterson's a soil scientist, and he went through and mapped out all the soils in East Edisto that would be conducive to farming. And we went out and met with farmers and said, we want to do farming here because that's what the people around here want. And they said, well, those are forests, you can't do farming there. I said, what are you talking about? I said, well, it would cost you $4,000 an acre to stump that. It would take you 2 or 3 years before you could run your farm equipment there, and you're not going to make nearly enough on farming. Nobody's going to farm that. So point being, if someone has a higher and better use for their land, we're not going to encourage them to take it out of annual production. Now, if you do want to grow trees in your land, or if you have cut over land, we are going to next try to take you to the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. You have a thing here that says EQIP. And they have programs that will help pay you for growing trees on your land, or for planting trees on your land. You have another one here, says the 5 steps to assistance. So let's say that you had trees in your ground, someone in the family cut your trees, and you have clear title to the land. you come to us and say, we wanna do forestry, because we heard from this guy Dave that it's worth, 5 or 8 times more than it would be if I just let it grow back naturally. And so we would help take you to the NRCS office in your county, and you would apply for funding. And let's say that the land was just cut over this past month, the last lot of trucks left, you have a little money in your pocket, and we take you to the NRCS, fill out forms that say, I want to replant my land, and they'll say, here are the practices, forestry practices that will be needed to plant this viable stand of trees. You apply now, their funding period ends in November. So if you apply today, they won't even consider your application till November is the end of the season, and the money that's being allocated now is really for next year. So if your trees are just cut over next spring, early summer, they would accept your application, and because you're historically underserved, you're African American, you're historically underserved, you're military, there's different scoring systems that can kind of help move you to the front of the line for let's say your land is in Colleton, well, you live in Charleston County. Let's say your land is in Charleston County. Charleston County has so much money allotted to the county for these programs each year. And you don't know what it is until, next year, but you're in the pool, you've signed up by November, spring, right around late summer, or late spring, early summer, right about now, the landowners who applied last year are receiving a contract from the NRCS. And the contract says, you, the landowner, will be doing this practice, shearing, this other practice, spraying, this other practice, bedding, this other practice, planting trees, conifer trees, this many per acre. And we're gonna pay you so much money per acre for each of those practices. It's supposed to, they call it 90% cost share. It's not free, you will pay something, and it's not you bring them a bill for $100 and they pay 90, you pay 10. It doesn't work quite like that. It's based on average prices for different things, which change over time, for different practices that are common to the Southeast. And so I'll give you a real-life example of someone who signed up the previous year and now has planted trees in the ground. Well, last fall, they might have had, say in October, November, they had tractors come in, shear off the old stumps, push up some piles of debris, and open the site for them to be able to plant trees. They do a thing called bedding. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but it's a huge tractor, pulls this bedding plow, sort of like you'd have on a farm. In a farm field, you might have beds that big that you put your corn on. Well, for trees, you have a bed about that big. And what that does, it's only used in areas that are very wet, but we live in the low country, so things are pretty wet here. So if you have land that's low and wet, the NRCS would prescribe bedding. Tractor makes a pass, and they pay so much for that pass to clear the land, so much for that pass to make the beds, and they're saying, I'm gonna pay you $220 an acre to do that. So once the tractors have left the site, they've sheared the land, made the beds, NRCS has an account that they set up with you, the landowner, and they will say, okay, they said they were gonna do 20 acres of beds, 20 acres of shearing. Those have been done. We will deposit the $228 per acre into their account, and they will pay the contractor. Well, it might cost the contractor $300, so you might have had to pay $75 per acre to do that. January rolls around. Trees need to be planted, and most landowners, I guess one of the benefits of working with the center is you probably don't know somebody who has a D4, D6 tractor that will come to your land and plow. We would connect you with those people. You probably don't know someone who plants trees or buys trees or were even to buy trees. We would connect you with those resources. So January rolls around, we help you find a contractor who's going to plant the trees. We help connect you with one of our partners, Arborgen, to get trees, plant trees. They come and plant your land. The NRCS has already, in your contract last year, they said, we're going to pay you $175 per acre to plant your land. Well, it might have only cost you $140 per acre, cost of the trees and the planter. So in that case, you might actually end up, and this is based on real life things that have happened this year. People lost a little money this year. I mean, they paid more for the site prep contractors, but they ended up getting a little money extra on the planting operation. Then comes spring, we have what's called a herbicide release treatment to kill the weeds around the little pine trees and give them a good start. NRCS might pay you $60 an acre to do that, and it might cost you $100 an acre to get it done. Once again, you'll end up paying a little bit. But the bottom line is, for folks we've had who have about 20 acres, if they come out of pocket with about $800 or $1,000, they are leveraging about $7,000 or more of NRCS money, and then you can just take those figures up. If you have 40 acres, double that, 60 acres, triple that. But the reality is, this is an incredible program for anybody who has land and wants to manage their land. And the other thing, the unseen benefits are, once you have this stand of trees growing, it's very hands-off. Like some people that come say, hey, I want to grow hemp and get rich, or I want to grow crops on my land, and I've got 5 or 10 acres, but you have to live there. It's something you're going to have to work with all the time. It's very time-consuming. It's very hard work. Whereas trees, once you get your trees in the ground, it's kind of on autopilot. We had 100-degree weather last week for a week straight. Those trees are still growing fine. We had snow not this past winter, the winter before. Those trees are still out there growing. And I know one of the things they're talking about here, climate change and the sea level, that's going to be a big issue. Sea level rise 2 feet here on Johns Island, that could be a big issue, but I contend to you that growing loblolly pine trees 100 years from now is still going to be a great thing. CO2 levels rise, guess what? Trees love CO2. You're going to be sequestering carbon, you'll be helping the land around here, you're growing trees, you're creating oxygen, taking in carbon dioxide, and at the same time, you're making your land more valuable for you and for the future generations. And while I'm very excited about the land and the value of the land, some people think, whoa, wow, I can make $30,000, $50,000 or more. We've had landowners who had over $100,000 in timber value. It's not like winning the lottery. You're not going to quit your day job. But what I try to explain to people is, if you have this one time or 2 times influx of money into your life or your family's life, what if you could help pay off help pay your kids' way through college, and you have a son or daughter, or son and daughter, who go to college, and for the rest of their life they're making more money. They come out of school without debt, and they can start investing in their future, in their children's future. What if you get to pay off your house and then start using whatever you're paying your mortgage, and you start investing that in for your kids or for your future? I think all of us want a better future for our children, and sometimes one thing like that can make a big difference. And also the connection to the land. Land that, to me, I own a piece of land, and I have always loved land, but I think it's one of the last great American freedoms, where I have this piece of land and I can do whatever I want on it. I can go walk on the land if I want to use it as a nature reserve. I can just have a place to go out to walk, have a family picnics with my family. I can grow trees on it. I can grow crops on it. I can allow family members to put a mobile home on it, or I can build a house, or let my children build a house on it. But there's not a lot of things where you have that kind of freedom today, where you can make decisions and somebody can't come and tell you what to do with your land. So once again, if you have land in your family, make every effort to keep it. Do not let it go to tax sale. Do not, and make sure that you're making absolute use of it. Some other things that we might tell people, I started talking about, we come out to visit your land. I might ask you some things about, she mentioned the taxation. We had a lady in Berkeley County about a year and a half ago, came to us, and she had 2 or 3 little pieces of land. One was like 15 acres, and it was kind of out in the woods, and then she had another one, 2 others that were on the road. One was 5, and the other one might have been 5. And she was saying, oh, the taxes are killing me. And I said, well, how much are you paying for taxes for this land? And she told me, and I said, that doesn't sound right. That sounds really high. For forest land, I mean, this was forest land. One had a mobile home on it, but the mobile home had not been lived in since 1975 or something like that. So I said, let me look into this. And I said, there's forms here for Berkeley County that you can fill out to you know, explain to them that this is forest land and kind of petition to them. She filled out those forms, and this past December, she sent me an email. She said, I just got my tax bill for next year. You won't believe it. I'm saving $1,200 a year. Well, that's significant and that's going forward forever until you build on it or something. But things like that people might just not know about. If you know someone, or if you have trees on your land and want to sell them, and if you've never done that before, you probably aren't going to have any good sense of what the trees are worth. And if somebody can come to you, and this happens, you know, people will, if they look at the tax maps, they see a piece of forest land out there, and they say, hey, you know, I'm going to approach these people and try to buy their trees. If someone comes to you and says, well, I'll give you $20,000 for your trees, you know, oh, that's a lot of money. Yeah, I'll take that. Or, well, I don't know what my trees are worth. Somebody comes to you a week later or 2 weeks later and says, I'll give you $25,000 for those trees. And you say, whoa, these trees must be worth something. I'm gonna take that $25,000 because it's, you know, worth that much more than the guy last week. I better cash in on this. Well, I assure you that if people are doing that, one, there's some value, but you don't know if those two people are working together. They could be in the same office, you know, that buys timber, and you know, one calls you and the other calls you, and you know, to make you think this is worth a lot more. But there's a lot to it. Before you ever sell your trees, make sure to know what they're worth. And I can't, if I come out and look at your land, I'm not going to tell you, oh, they're worth $22,456. There's no way I can or would do that. But what I can do is say, yeah, this looks like it's all saw timbers. You know, that's like a $20 a ton product. And there's a lot of other factors of how many acres it is. A lot of people, they'll come and say, well, I got these trees in my backyard, and they're big and they're fat, and you know, can you get somebody to come and cut them? Well, they're in your backyard, and there's only 42 of them. That's a log truck and a half. There's not enough room in your yard for a logger to set up his equipment. So people, you really need to have, and one of the things that you probably, if you read through the stuff there, it'll tell you that 10 acres is what we consider to be a forest that we can work with you, that we can help you with. We will help you with less. I've seen out in Berkeley County, up near Pineville, where a landowner, we call it clustering, where we have one person who's getting, a logger comes in and he's cutting 20 acres here, somebody over here has 5 acres. You couldn't get a logger to go to 5 acres to cut. And no guy over here had an acre of pine trees in his yard. The logger cut all that in one job. And this guy got a little check, wasn't a lot. So we will look for opportunities to do that. But if you have 10 acres or more, we can automatically, for no money out of your pocket, we can take you to the NRCS and get you a forest management plan. Once again, you're not gonna get your plan next week. And a forest management plan is a great thing to have, not just for you, but when you pass on, your family will know what your intentions were, and they'll know, you know, like if your kids say, well, I don't know what to do with those trees, you know, they have those trees, you know, trying to do forestry, I have no idea. Well, if you have this management plan, it'll say, 2027, you know, get a forester, consulting forester will market those trees, and then they'll replant, or, you know, the whole, many different things that you might need to know, and the timing of those things, so that it's sort of a part of an estate plan, so that your family and your descendants will know, one, that you were purposely doing forestry, two, what do I do when that happens? I mentioned a consulting forester. If you have over 25, 30 acres of trees with any amount of value at all, we will probably, the first thing we're going to do, and you're interested in harvesting timber, we're probably we can give you names of people who will buy your timber. They're timber buyers, but they're consulting foresters, and the thing that we would do is to connect you with a consulting forester who would cruise your timber. You might have heard the term cruising timber. They walk through all of your land, and they map out what are the different products, how old are they, how tall are they, how fat are the trees, you know, and what kind of products will those trees make. And they know, a forester working in your area will know what the markets are current today, 2019, who's buying what. There might be some hot market for, you know, some product going to Japan in these containers you see leaving out of Charleston. There might be some new plywood product or some new flooring product or some special market because the price of, people can't get the woods, it's too wet, and so hardwoods are a big deal. There are a lot of things that the average person or even somebody in forestry in another area might not know about, but that person will market your timber and he will bid it out. They have several ways of selling timber, but they would have what's called a sealed bid where he bids it out to 4 or 5 different buyers, something that you would not be able to do easily or probably at all. And that way, in any point in time, you know that you're getting the highest price that you possibly can for your trees. We've I've seen sealed bids on one tract, like 40 acres of trees that the bids were between $28,000 and $72,000. That was the spread of the bids. Well, if you go to one person, one buyer, and you say, well, I got 35,000, so the guy only gave me 28 or even 40. Well, how did you know you could have been making 70? And $40,000 in your pocket is better than $40,000 in somebody else's pocket. When you have a forester market your timber, the consulting forester doesn't take money up front. He's going to get proceeds from the timber sale, and that's the great thing about it, because he might take 8 or 10%, but the amount of money more that you would make by having a consulting forester sell your trees is more than you could ever do on your own. You could get lucky, but most people don't get lucky, and it's something that you're going to only do once or twice in your lifetime. And selling your trees, you might do more things, but if you're clear cutting and replanting, that's not going to happen a lot of times. You want to maximize the return you can get. And as an example, we have an annual symposium, and I'd like to invite all of you here. I don't know if we have any papers on that, but if you're on our mailing list or want to get on our mailing list, there's an annual landowner symposium. This year it's going to be held in Charleston. We had the state forester for the state of South Carolina spoke at our symposium last year. This guy knows more than you do, knows more than I do about forestry. He is the state forester for South Carolina. Forestry is one of the biggest things we do here. He told the crowd there last year, he said, I have a piece of land, I don't know if it's Georgia or Mississippi, and he said, I'm selling the timber on it, and he said, I'm not selling the timber myself. I'm hiring a consulting forester who lives in that area, knows those markets, to market that for me, and I'm more than willing to pay him the 8 or 10% that he will charge me, because one, it doesn't come out of my pocket, it comes out of the proceeds. So the more money I make, the more money he makes. I believe that he will make more money than me because he knows that area better than I do, and he deals with it. He's the one who's going to be flagging out the boundary lines, making sure that when it gets cut, that they're cutting all on my land and not on the adjacent landowner's land where I'm going to get sued. He's going to be watching to make sure the saw timber logs, the $20 a ton product, $25 a ton product is not going on the pulpwood truck, the $10 a ton product. He's going to monitor all that and be sure that I'm getting the most that I can, for the trees in my land. The forester will also help you replant the land. As I said, when you do a timber sale like that, you'll have money in your pocket. So having a little bit of money to put into invest in the land, leveraging the NRCS funding to do so, it will put you on a much better, much more valuable path to a future for wealth for you and wealth for your family. Are there any questions? I know I've covered a lot. I think we talked about EQIP. I will talk briefly about one or two other things. This is kind of circling back. I have some statistics here. The threats to woodlands in the U.S. This was an American Forestry Foundation study. Wildfire, 3.5 million acres. Insects and disease, 4.5 million acres. Natural disasters, 6.2 million acres. Development, 7.5 million acres. That's a big issue here. Parcelization, 11.8 million acres. Uninterested owners, 19.5 million acres. So one of the biggest threats is people being disinterested in the land that they have. And so taking an interest in your land, having somebody, as I said, one of my jobs I feel is being an educator, but also a cheerleader. I want you to go out and love your land. I've had people come out who didn't really, they just thought, that's the forest out there. Well, we had a landowner this past year who was in that camp last summer, and this spring, she was so excited about her land getting trees planted, and she was sending pictures of me with her daughter, holding their little baby trees. And I know this person is going to go back there and Next year, that tree will be that big, and 2 years from now, that young lady is gonna be standing next to a tree that's bigger than her, and I guarantee you that that young lady is going to wanna take over that land when her parents are gone, because she has touched it, felt it, been part of it from the time there were little seedlings put in the ground, and she will follow that through. But that's my hope for the folks here, is that you will love the land that you have, try to protect it, and try to make the most of it. And I appreciate your attention. If there are any questions, I have cards, would love to.
I have one question.
Sure.
So if someone decided, they have 5 acres or 10 acres of land, and they have invested in growing the trees, and you talk about, fire happening, I'm just wondering, is there any way to protect your investment?
Yes, and that's one of the things that NRCS will help you with. You can plow fire lines around. That was the other thing I meant to mention with that is, if people get all worried about, oh, what if I plant trees and there's a hurricane, knocks them all down? Valid point, could happen, but Hurricane Hugo hit here, Hurricane Floyd hit here. There have been hurricanes the whole time I've been down here, and there are places like the National Forest during Hurricane Hugo that all those trees were snapped off. You drive up there now and show me where that was. I mean, a forester or somebody looking at it might say, I can see there are differences here, but this forest we have is very resilient. Fires were a huge problem here for generations. Many years ago, the woods burned all the time. People purposefully burned the woods. They didn't have any state fire plows to put them out. There were not all the roads to stop them. The river drainage would probably stop a fire in, even in really dry times. But burning used to be a common thing. The chance of losing your trees to burning is really slim, and you can have fire lines plowed around your property to prevent, like if somebody's throwing a cigarette. Most fires, as you probably know, are started by people. One of the biggest things is people burning trash in hot weather, dry weather, windy weather, and the fire gets away from them. But you can, the state of South Carolina, that's one of the many programs that most people don't know about. You can have somebody come and plow lines around your property. The first hour is, let's see, I think it costs $140, which is pretty cheap insurance. But if you want to get lines plowed around your land, I think it's $140 for the first hour and like $60 or $80 for every hour after that. If you only have 5 acres, it's not going to take them the first hour to do that. It's mostly the cost of them bringing the tractor to your property. I mean, actually, it's what you're paying them is below what it costs the state to do that. That's our tax dollars helping you get your lines plowed. But if you had interest in getting fire lines plowed around property, you talk to me after. Love to connect you with the people who can do that for you. This time of year is not really we're kind of past our bad fire season. You can get fires at this time of year, but the worst fire season is in the spring, when there's no green growth yet to kind of keep fires down, and you've got a lot of windy, dry conditions, mid to late April, somewhere in Arizona. You usually have bad fires in this part of the country. But I can help you get fire lines plowed. That's something.
Well, I don't have any land, I was just wondering if someone.
If you know anybody who needs lines plowed, we'll make that happen. Thank you.
David, it is important to know that, like farmers, if they have crop insurance, for landowners that grow trees, there's no insurance that you can get. The insurance that's allowed to you is really what Farm Service Agency provides. So if we have a major catastrophe like a fire, a hurricane, or just bugs, FSA, your state forester goes and asks for money to help support the private landowner. And they pass it down to the landowner to get that crop of trees back in the ground. Let's say you lose just your crop of trees. You have the ability to go to NRCS, apply for what we call cost share funds, to help you get new trees in the ground. So that is your insurance policy as a landowner, okay, without you having to pay for insurance up front.
Thank you. And I'm going to talk about a couple more things. These are also in your packet, but conservation stewardship program, for someone who's already working with the NRCS, you've already established that you're doing good conservation. Well, they have programs where if you want to take it to the next level. And we have some landowners, one in Allendale who just did this, where they were growing trees, they just planted trees, so they're already working with the NRCS. And they also have some farmland, and they said, well, you know, I'm not leasing all this land, is there something I can do? And they said, well, right now we're promoting what we call pollinators. There's a dramatic decline in bees and butterflies and things that pollinate. Well, those are necessary for our farming crops. So the NRCS has a program where you can plant, I think it's a half acre for every 40 acres of land that you own, quarter acre for 20 acres. In any case, this lady's gonna plant a little plot of a quarter acre of bee pollinators, butterfly pollinators, specific seeds. They will give you this list of plants that you're supposed to be growing, and you plant this little plot, and they will pay you $1,500 per year to do this. It's a 5-year commitment. You know, install this planting and upkeep it for 5 years, and during that time, they will pay you. So some people who say, well, I'm not leasing all that land, and there's something else I can do with it. There's a lot of little programs that people don't know about that we can connect you with. There's some others where they're planting specific native shrubs to try to enhance properties. As I said, forestry is my forte, but we will work with people, like if you're planting some crops and you're watering, you know, started small time and you're watering them, you know, with some kind of sprinkler system, and you want to move to drip irrigation. NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, has funding to help you put in an irrigation system. If you keep goats, we have some people who keep goats, and you know, you got 5 or 10 goats and you want to increase your herd and you need some fencing or whatever. They're not going to put you in the business of keeping goats, but if you are increasing that, or they're not going to put you in the business of irrigation, but if you're already watering and can show that, they have programs where they'll help you improve that, increase that, for any kind of cattle or things like that. If you have a pond where you need to keep the cattle, to keep the water clean, or ways where you're pumping water and you don't want the cattle peeing and stuff in there, they have ways that they'll help you pay for fencing. But there's just a lot of programs that most average people would not know about that are available through the NRCS, and we will try to connect you with those things. Tax tips for landowners. We've had a lot of landowners. This is another thing that you would probably get if you come to our annual symposium. Okay, you've never really had all of a sudden influx of $50,000 or $70,000 into your annual. That's a capital gain. There are ways to offset that capital gain. You're going to owe taxes. You know, you make a lot of money, you're going to pay some taxes. But there are ways to offset that by the money you're spending into the next stand, and ways of knowing okay, what I do this time around that costs me money that I can offset those capital gains. And a lot of people, those are things people wouldn't normally know, but we're going to have some speakers who are experts on this to talk about tax tips and record keeping and things like that are critically important if you have this really is kind of a business. It's a forestry business that you're starting your own personal business. The one last thing I'll mention, I don't see it right here, Tree Farm is a program. If you have a thing in there on Tree Farm, but if you start growing, there it is, Certified Tree Farm. Some of you might have seen this little emblem, the Tree Farm sign. And so if you're growing trees, purposefully growing trees, doing it in a sustainable fashion, you can join this Tree Farm program and be a certified tree farmer. And you say, you know, what that will do for you is, a lot of times if you go buy a coffee or something and it says certified, what it's telling you, a lot of people now, a lot of companies want people to know that they're doing things in a sustainable way. So they want to know that the trees that were grown, that you didn't, you know, take them from some tropical forest and cut and slash and burn it and walk away from it, that you're growing trees sustainably, you're following best management practices here in South Carolina. And so a lot of times the companies will want to buy your wood if it's been sustainably grown, and if you have that Tree Farm sign, they know that you're doing things sustainably. The way to join that is you start off and you're a pioneer. You just send your thing saying, you know, I want to join Tree Farm. They will come out and certify your tree farm. They'll ask you questions. You have to have a forest management plan to do that. So if you're growing trees and if you have a forest management plan, you can join this tree farm program. And it's a good inexpensive way to have certified wood, so that if there's two tracts of the same size next to each other, and this one's certified and this one isn't, and they're buying timber or they have a quota at the mill, they might say, well, I'm gonna buy your wood because it's certified, this guy's is not certified. So those are much further down the road. But to get started, if anybody has forest land, or if you know anyone with forest land and they need help with their land, we would love to come out, we'd love to meet you, look at your land with you, and try to help you make it as valuable as you can for your family. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. So, we're at the end of the formal presentation. So now, there are a couple options of things you can do to participate. One, we have nice refreshments that were provided by Low Country Land Trust and the Greater St. John AME Church. So there's some refreshments that you can partake of. We are also available, there are 3 attorneys here. If anyone has specific questions about your land, probate issue, you can sit down with one of the attorneys. Also, we have this map over here, and we have ladies from NC State who would like to hear your opinion about what happens here on Johns Island. So you have an opportunity to contribute to what will happen as Johns Island grows by making your input and participating with their mapping activity. So if you would, please complete your green evaluation sheet and make sure I get those. And if you are interested in having an intake with one of the attorneys, you should become sign up here. And then, like I said, the ladies from NC State will be participating in a map activity, and they would appreciate your participation.
And if folks can't stay for an intake with an attorney today, how do they go about coming to see you?
So,
and what is the cost?
free 1-hour consultation. Free, no dollars, a little bit of time. Drive across the bridge, they're not that far away. You can get the consultation with an attorney, sit down, look at your family information, your deeds, any questions you have about land in South Carolina. It does not have to be in Charleston County, it can be anywhere in South Carolina. You get a free 1-hour consultation. If you need legal assistance and you meet all the requirements, you could possibly enter as a client, which you would be charged no attorney's fees. Okay? So you get an intake today or at a future date by calling. You have materials. All the materials have our telephone number, refrigerator magnet, stick on your refrigerator. Maybe you don't need us now, but you may need us down the road. A family member dies, and you know, she talked about that probate thing. I might need to find out about that now, so.
Can I just explain how they can meet with us? Is that okay if I can take just a minute? Again, I'm Erin. We're down from North Carolina State University. And we have lots of maps, not just that map, but we've got 15 of these maps. So if you are willing to stay and enjoy the refreshments and talk with us a little bit, what we'll do is if you're going to stay to talk to one of the attorneys, we'd also like to talk to you to just get you to look at the map with us and tell us about what areas you think are most important to protect from development. So as you sign up to talk to an attorney, maybe we can sign you up to talk to one of us, Erin, or Yelena, or Lindsay. There are 3 of us here. Or if you are not going to talk to an attorney, but you're willing to look at the map with us, I'm going to suggest we can gather around this table. We'll have a map for each one of you, and you can give us your input on what you think is most important on Johns Island. Again, we are from North Carolina State University. You're not mishearing that. We're not from South Carolina. We're down here because of Mr. Sam Cook, who used to work down here, and now he's come up to North Carolina State University. So he got us involved in working together with the Land Trust and the Center to help think about how to map priorities on Johns Island.
So why do you need my information?
We need your input. So we all work with maps. We've got information from satellite images, all sorts of background information. But what we don't have is the local perspective, the perspective of people who live on Johns Island, who own land on Johns Island, and who know out specifically what's important to protect on Johns Island. So that's why we're here. And we can pull all the maps we want and all the data we want, all the statistics, but we're looking for input from people who live here and really know what's valuable on the island. So we can put it together on a map and then give it to our friends in South Carolina to participate in the process of planning for a better future for Johns Island. So that's what we're about. So again, we're gonna, as you sign up to meet with the attorneys, we're gonna try to sign you up to talk with us. Or if you're willing to grab some food and sit down with us and look at these maps, we promise we won't keep you here for too long. I know we're pushing into lunchtime, but we would really appreciate getting your insights on what's important to preserve on this island. What you're worried about being threatened by development, whether it's farmland or creeks or some patch of forest. Other
Well,
questions?
I
Other
have a
questions?
question then, so, you're creating this map, and I wanna know how the information will be really used.
Okay, so we will create a map that pulls together information from everyone here who gives us input. And we've had a number of other workshops on the island. Maybe some of you have even seen this before. We've had workshops at a few different churches to get that input on what's valuable. We'll create maps that show, from the perspective of people who live on Johns Island, the Johns Islander perspective, what really matters to protect. And then we will provide those maps to the Low Country Land Trust and the Center for Air Property Preservation, who are working to put together a coalition of organizations. We'll work with organizations on Johns Island, whether it's the Progressive Club or the Concerned Citizens, lots of different organizations here. That's the next step, is to put together a coalition of organizations that can plan for the future of the island, plan where to concentrate their efforts, working together maybe with different types of conservation mechanisms, whether it's the green belt or whether it's the programs that David was just describing from the NRCS, and see if they can help guide those organizations to focus on what's important to preserve. So we, individually from North Carolina, we're from North Carolina, so we're not gonna come down here and do anything with it. We're gonna give the information to people who are down here to help them plan better for the future of the island.
But I guess I'm concerned about, gathering information from various kinds of people, or, the mixture, because you could be going to one group, for instance, and getting information that may send a biased opinion about what should happen if this is not a scientific type, collection. So you're from the University of North Carolina?
North Carolina State University.
Okay, so probably will be
Different
scientific,
basketball
but I'm
teams.
just trying to figure out,
How we get
the-
a representative.
yeah,
perspective,
and how the information will be used, because I will tell you, sometimes I've gotten, information from groups where, small population, they got information from, was not a wide enough participation of people, for me to really draw from that. So once you put this together, I hope there'll be information, for the viewers to understand, the population that you use.
Yes, you are exactly right about that. So again, we've had several workshops here where we have done this mapping exercise, and we have exactly the same concern that you do. It's a small number of people that comes to each workshop out of a large number of people who live on Johns Island or who own land on Johns Island, have an interest in the island. So it's part of the reason we're here today. We think maybe the folks who come today, who likely, I expect a lot of you own Heirs property on Johns Island, that's a perspective that maybe we haven't heard enough. So we're hoping to diversify the information we have by getting your input. But it still may not be enough. I take your point. And so I think the next step that the Low Country Land Trust and the Center have been discussing, we've had meetings over the past couple days, is exactly how to make sure that they get input from all of the organizations on Johns Island. And so what is the strategy to make sure that there is broad input from all of the different groups? Beyond, so we have our maps, we'll provide those, but then they need to take those and think about, well, what should be the plan? What should be the conservation plan, the plan to manage development, to think about farmlands and forest land on Johns Island. And I think they are very aware that they need input from all of the different organizations. Because I will admit, we have not done that. We have not gone out like the census does and talked to everyone on the island. So we've talked to selected groups, and you're right, we'll report that these are the selected groups we've talked to. And that's where these maps are coming from. And so now we need to get these maps out to all the other groups on Johns Island and get their input so that it really does reflect everyone's perspective.
I do think it's great that people will have an opportunity to express, their wishes for the use of land. So I don't want to,
Well,
make
I
it look
really
like.
appreciate your point. It's a completely valid point, right? There may be people who can't get out of their home and come to one of these meetings, but that doesn't mean that their perspective is not important, right? So that's right. We still need to work on, we meaning the broader coalition of the land trust, working together with input from the center, how to make sure that everyone's represented in the process. Is there another question here?
I agree with what Mrs. Johnson is saying. I think it's a good move, but the big question in my mind is, when it comes to the end, how much of what we are saying is going to matter? Who is going to be there to make sure, our concerns are addressed? That's that's what I am mainly concerned about.
And who truly is gonna benefit from it all.
I think this is the starting point, and one of the things that's been outlined and discussed in several of the meetings since we started the process is how do we build up the community to keep giving input to the organizations such as the center and the land trust. These guys or ladies are doing actually just the research and asking the questions, but it's also to help form what you as individual citizens down here want to see your island look like. So as meetings or other groups come together, people be inviting you to show up to come and participate, that's gonna help make this movement successful. So today is really just getting your feedback to say, what do you think the desired look is for Johns Island? How do you want to preserve it and keep it? So in the future, people can help you manage to get it that way and protecting the landscape. And so no one's names are being used and nobody's targeting that we was at this church and we got all this information from this group of people that was at the church. Yeah.
And I think there's a value in collecting these perspectives. If we can say something like the community, values the creeks and the wetlands, and we can show you some maps. And I'm sure when you show a map at a meeting or when you're making a case, it's powerful. You can physically see something represented. Being able to just say that, what we found is that there's consensus around this one value. I think that's a really great starting, like Sam said, to continue the conversation.
We have another question here.
It's not a question, it's a comment. If you use the legal notices in the paper and the other places where they put out legal notices, you will have a very large turnout of people who are interested because people genuinely care about what's happening here. If any of you have ever gone to a zoning meeting, we had over 200 people come out just to fight one use of the land on Johns Island. And we listened to the zoning board members saying, oh, it doesn't matter, it's just Johns Island. And people really would love to give their input, but you're gonna need a really large venue if you do.
That's good.
That's really.
We've been looking for suggestions of how to return information. So again, we've been down here, we're creating these maps, and we will share them with the organizations we're working with, but we would like to share them back with you.
Exactly.
Right? But the question is, how do we get them to you? So if any of you would like to come tell us individually, it's through this church, it's through this organization, it's through this newsletter, it's through a notice in this newspaper, we will definitely follow up. We will make sure that we get the information back to you. Other questions or advice for us? This is great. Okay, well thank you for the opportunity. So again, please do stay and share a gift part of this. Yeah, so there's
if anyone came in and did not sign the general sign-in sheet, please do that for me, as well as if you'd like the intake to come sign up for that.
Here's the intake sheet for that.